Hello, welcome to Pasadena Independent School District STAAR-chitecture, moving past the prompt and the plan, professional development. Today, you're going to look at how to structure STAR writing for mastery. We're going to deconstruct and analyze student essays from TEA before you have the opportunity to construct your own essay. It's important to be able to construct an essay so that you'll know what the students go through and you'll be able to better assist them with each part of the writing task. We're going to get started with looking at the objectives. The content objective on your left involves using information from pre-writing plans, also known as insider charts, and using them to appropriately structure drafts. Then, for the language content, we're going to work with utilizing tools to generate appropriately organized essay drafts with connecting words and phrases that create a sense of cohesion. The materials that you're going to need are paper and pen or a pencil. Now we're going to look at the rationale for this professional development, in that there's a reason why we need to help students with their STAR essays. For English 1, approximately 34% of students did not master the writing task. For English 2, approximately 37% of students did not master the writing task. So as teachers, we need to be prepared to help the students to plan, draft, and revise an essay so that they're able to master the STAR writing task. We're going to begin by looking at a student's essay. You'll need your paper and a pen or pencil because you'll want to make a list of at least 4 things that you notice in terms of what the student did well. After reading the essay, you'll make a note of what the writer did to meet or exceed expectations with their STAR expository essay. This is a score point 4. You may pause the video, and when you return, we'll look at some of the possible answers for noticings. Welcome back. Amongst other things, you may have noticed that the student had a precise thesis statement. The student included an introduction. The student included a conclusion. The student used examples to support the thesis statement. Let's take a look at a STAR prompt so that we can see what students begin with. In order to write an essay that meets the expectations per the state, students need to be able to analyze and understand what they're writing about. Sometimes it's not as easy as it seems. Let's take a look. Before you read the prompt all the way through on your own, I'll call to your attention the 3 things that students need to focus on. First, they need to focus on reading the quotation. The quotation will have something to do with the writing task. Then, students need to think about a statement provided by TEA. Often, students will mistakenly write about the think statement. Then, after they've analyzed the think statement, students are expected to write an essay, either explaining or persuading. Please pause the recording here, and when you return, we'll be prepared to look at how students should plan for their STAR essay. When planning for a STAR essay, I would encourage students to utilize a graphic organizer such as the insider chart. If you'll notice to the left, there's a space for students to record the prompt. After they record the topics, they move to the next section. More concrete information. Examples. There are several categories of the examples. First, historical. Next, events, those that are personal. Next, literary. Then pop culture, and then sports. When students use concrete examples in their essays, it gives them credibility. And finally, you have the last column, which is the working thesis statement column. Now, let's take a look at what happens next. Once students have recorded information on their insider charts, they have to think about how they would structure that information. I would recommend utilizing an expository structure such as the onion. In this way, students see a visual of how they should construct their essays. They should always remember that they need an introduction, they need layer 1, and that is used to support the thesis statement included in the introduction. They need a conclusion, and if they have more than one example to talk about, they could include layers 2, 3, 4, and so on. However, it is not necessary for students to have more than one support for their thesis statement in order to receive a score point 4 on an essay. Let's take a look at a structure for persuasive writing. For those working with the English 2 persuasive writing task, I would recommend Tevye's debate. Students would, of course, include an introduction and conclusion. However, they would be able to include their point of view, an alternate point of view, and then go back to support. And then they could go back to supporting their point of view, which strengthens a persuasive essay. Anytime you begin and end with your point of view, it makes your point the most memorable. So if students practice Tevye's debate, they would be prepared to write an essay and achieve mastery. Let's do a little activity where we look at the different parts of an essay and identify them. If students can identify an introduction and support for thesis and a conclusion in someone else's essay, chances are they wouldn't be able to create those components on their own. So this is scaffolding for students if you decide to use this in your classroom. Please read the information in each of the boxes. After you've read the information, I need you to record which box is number 1 for introduction, which box is number 2 for first supporting paragraph, which box is number 3 for second supporting paragraph, and which box is number 4 for the conclusion. You may pause now, and when you return, you'll receive the answer. This is the key for the score point 4 essay you just labeled as introduction, support 1, support 2, and conclusion, numbers 1 through 4. Now we'll take a look at a persuasive essay and identify its components. Again, you'll want to number and label each of the boxes. 1 for introduction, 2 for support 1, 3 for support 2, 4 for support 4, and 5 for the conclusion. When you return, we'll look at the key. Welcome back. You're able to see the order that the student wrote the essay in, and you're able to decipher the introduction, conclusion, and the support. As you were reading, you may have noticed some of the connections between paragraphs and even within paragraphs. I'm going to pull those out and show you those on the next slide. In order to connect the essays from paragraph to paragraph, students utilize synonym chains and vocabulary chains. And in order to connect sentences within paragraphs, students use vocabulary chains again, but in addition to those, they use imagery chains where they describe a scene and so it's connected, and they use anaphora and repetition. Now let's practice identifying thought glue in excerpts from STAR essays pulled from TEA's website. Again, this is scaffolding for students should you choose to use this activity in your classroom. If students aren't able to identify cohesion within essays, they would be less likely to create them in their own. Okay, let's look at the next slide. Now you'll want to make a list of the thought glue that students use for each of the excerpts below. For paragraph to paragraph cohesion, we have synonym chains and vocabulary chains. For sentence to sentence cohesion, we again have vocabulary chains, but in addition to that, we have anaphora and repetition in general. We have synonym chains. In addition to paragraph cohesion, we have sentence to sentence cohesion. Students utilized, again, the vocabulary chain. They also utilize anaphora and repetition, as well as the imagery chain. You may pause here, make the list, and then we'll check. Welcome back. You'll notice that for the first excerpt, the student used an imagery chain. The next excerpt utilizes anaphora, while the third excerpt uses repetition. Now I think we're ready to look at a completed insider chart to see what students' ideas on paper looks like. The prompt reads, write about motivation. Explain why students should be compensated for good grades. So this is an expository writing task because students are being asked to explain rather than to persuade or convince the audience. The topics and ideas that could be connected to motivation would be reward, immediacy, positive reinforcement, a tool for teaching, achievement, incentive, counteracts negativity, relationship building. In terms of the examples in the insider column, those specific examples that students might list would be historically, children have been paid for completing chores. Additionally, events that are personal. A student may have experienced receiving payment for grades in the past, $10 for an A, $5 for a B, and etc. In terms of making connections to motivation and compensation for good grades, students may have seen movies, or they may have heard something. Students may have seen movies, or they may have heard songs about reward that they could make connections to. Additionally, there is a pop culture category, and students may be aware that recently AP students have received monetary reimbursement for their achievement. And in terms of sports, I'm not sure if there are any examples, but I could not think of any. And this is good for students because students need to know that when they utilize the insider chart, they don't need to have examples for every single category. It's just a way for them to brainstorm their ideas so that they can utilize the best examples. So even though there are 4 examples here, a student might only choose to write about 1 or 2 of those examples. Finally, we have the column for work and thesis statement, and this again is where students brainstorm ideas for a thesis statement. Students deserve monetary rewards for academic achievement. Could they prove that statement or support that statement with ideas and examples? Absolutely. And then another example of a work and thesis statement is pupils who receive compensation for achievement attain greater success. Could they prove that with support from their insider chart, maybe examples? Absolutely. So the key thing for students to remember is that with their thesis statement, they can always go back and change and revise it more so that it is connected to their support, so that their essay is as tight and cohesive as possible. Now, let's take a look at an example of a cohesive introductory example paragraph. Before you read the example on your own, I would like you to know the key for reading it. The bolded words are the words that came from the topics column. The more the words in the topics column are utilized in the essay, the more connected the essay seems because it refers directly back to the prompt and the ideas within the prompt. So those are the words there. And then the rest of the information is just development from the student's ideas. Now you're ready to plan, draft, and revise a STAAR essay. Things to consider. What's your stance or viewpoint? You'll want to know this so that you can be thinking about drafting your working thesis statements. Which examples will you use in the helps column? Which organizational structure would be best to use with the expository versus persuasive writing? If you're using more than one support, which one should go first? Which one should go second? And so on and so forth. Always remind students that the best support goes last. Which topics or ideas will you incorporate into your paragraphs? Even though you may have created an extensive list, that doesn't mean you'll use them all. So which ones will best support your thesis statement and your examples? And then where will you include those words? How many will you include in paragraph 1? How many in paragraph 2? These are all things to consider as you're planning. Finally, what's the best glue to include for cohesion? Now you're ready to take a look at your insider chart with the prompt. We'll begin again in the second video reviewing what you have written.